Coming up on Discode, now that we have the feature, or the project, depending on where you are, the design, or the architecture is what I'm referring to, and version control, we can start thinking about the nuts and bolts, or the tools we're going to use to get the job done. On the show is from artist Quintas Moreira. My personal update for this week: practicing breaking down a feature is critical. So I talked about that previously, where you want to make sure that you understand what you're going to work on, what your goal is, what's the scope of it, all those things. And I just rediscovered really. I just haven't done this kind of exercise in about a year, so it's a little difficult to dig that up when you're so rusty. But once I was able to actually get a very tight scope on what was going on and to break it down into a piece that was small enough to understand and to grasp. The second thing is having discourse with people is very important when you're working, especially with code, because you can get mired in the details of the code and not really have a good idea of what's going on as a whole. Like, you won't see the forest for the trees kind of a situation. So if you just stop and you get someone to ask you questions about what's going on, or like understand what you're working on, which I think is really what my team is missing. We do a Slack update every day, and I think having a voice one really kind of exercises that. So maybe I will try and institute that more often, even though a lot of times we're remote. That makes it difficult. And thirdly, refactoring takes a ton of effort and time. I'm currently doing a lot of refactoring because the patterns that we used previously don't really fit with the new model that we're working with. And just creating a new paradigm in general allows you to create new patterns and things like that. And so there's a lot of yanking things out and refactoring things into their own entities, so to speak. But it's much better if you just do it in a more reasonable designed pattern to begin with than to do this later. Just want to keep that in mind whenever you're working on something and you want to take some shortcuts. It's best not to, because later is going to be harder. The segment I was calling Quality Code, I don't think is quite accurate. I'm rethinking just the naming. Again, naming is hard. So we're just going to call it code from now on. So I'll rename it. Anyway, not a big deal. So to start off with a tip, I'm going to say that you should try your best to choose the best tool for the job, not to try and force something to do a task or do a job that it wasn't made to do. And what do I mean by that? I mean, if you're an expert or you're very comfortable with a certain language and you're just doing that with any task, you're using the same language, whether or not it fits the right paradigm, then that's the wrong thing to do. If you're very comfortable using Spring, but you're not building something that works best with that, then don't do that. There's lots of examples. If you love relational databases, but the design you made works better with a NoSQL database, then realize that, or a time series database or something. It's a little bit more niche, but it works well for what you're doing, then do that. Don't try and force something else. Although a lot of people like to try and force relational databases everywhere, but I won't go into that. Moving on to the main topic today, we're looking at tools. And what are we talking about when we're talking about tools? We're talking about languages, frameworks, deployment targets, data storage, messaging, build, CI, anything that allows you to get whatever piece of the job you're doing done. So some examples which are really helpful if you are hard to grasp on a certain topic. Examples are just, they solidify everything. So we're doing examples instead of really diving into what all these things are. And I think most people have probably come across, if they've even had a job where they've worked in code for 6 months, they'll probably come across most of these areas and know what they are. So the first one, languages. So coming from a JVM perspective, Java versus Scala versus Groovy versus Kotlin. So Java is a little bit of a one-size-fits-all language, although it's not specialized in certain areas. It's been around for so long. There's so much livelihood. That's not really the right word. There's so much community around it that there's pretty much a way to do it, a way to do anything with it. But you don't necessarily want to choose Java to do functional programming, because Scala is there. That's a functional language. And then there's also, if you need a little bit more flexibility, maybe you don't want to use Java, you want to use Groovy, because Groovy is a little bit more JavaScript kind of ish. No, they have loose typing. There's a lot of other elements that are just easier to script with. Some of the APIs that are built in. And then there's Kotlin. So if you want something that's a little bit more or less verbose, a little bit more concise, then you want to use Kotlin. Or if you want to just build Android apps, you should probably use Kotlin, obviously. An example of frameworks would be, coming from a Java perspective, still Spring versus basically combining everything that Spring has on your own, which maybe you don't need everything in Spring, which is a great reason to do it. So an example is Java plus Juice for dependency injection. And then there are a couple other small tools to do some of the other things you need, but that's basically all you need from Spring sometimes. If you're just building a back-end system, maybe like we did previously, some serverless functions. That's kind of all you need. I mean, there's some other libraries like validation stuff that you might want to use if you're building APIs and things like that, but that's the idea. And then for deployment targets, usually it's in the cloud. So you got AWS versus Azure versus Google. Amazon is sort of a one-size-fits-all, but they have their few specialties in there. And then in Azure, of course, Microsoft stack, if you need to do stuff on Microsoft. So you don't want to try and force your Microsoft stuff into AWS. You probably could do it, but it's just not the easiest thing to do. And then patterns around it. We're using just a monolith stack right now, a monolith application with Spring, but you may want to choose a distributed system. You may want to choose serverless functions. You may not, because you want a user-facing API to be responsive. Maybe you want asynchronous stuff to happen, so maybe serverless works well. You got to kind of decide what's going on, all the pieces that you need that fit your architecture, where they are and what they are. Data storage, relational database, like I was talking about earlier, maybe that works great because you need atomic transactions, everything to happen at once, everything to be one thing, but all kind of different data. Maybe you don't need that. Maybe you just want to store some files somewhere, like to S3 for Amazon, or just on some computer that has a disk that's for file storage. Or maybe you need document storage and you want something that's really highly available and really quick. So NoSQL database works well for that. And yeah, I mean, there are probably endless, like I was talking about earlier, time series database. That's perfect for, you need to keep track of very specific timing of things in the order that they go. I haven't ever used a time series database. I did a lot of research when I almost used one, but anyway. Another example, messaging. So if you want to use Kafka for whatever specific reason versus the Amazon version that does the managed, I mean, generally you want to choose managed just because then you don't have to do operations on whatever you're using as well as use it to build what you want. You can let someone else manage it and you can just build but maybe you need a very specific part of some system, some architecture that only you can host. And then build in CI, same idea, right? So I would definitely choose a hosted service type thing for this, except maybe you have very sensitive data that's flowing through your system that you need to host it yourself. But the problem with that is I think now there are plenty of systems that you can use that are HIPAA compliant, for example, that you can easily get the right paperwork, the right contract to say that it's HIPAA compliant and your data will not leak and things like that. So you don't have to do the managing of a build server or like a bug tracking system, things like that. And that's just the rundown of choosing tools. Now, you just, as a summary, just step back when you want to get started and make sure you understand the requirements of your architecture and do research on tools that fit that architecture, not try to force something together because you'll just be sorry later. Now for weekend review, I think I sort of touched on, well, maybe not completely, but we'll talk about creating a course here. I think I hit a major wall when I was trying to force, there's a common theme here, I was trying to force something that I thought would be a great idea into getting started too fast. So I need to step back now. So I wanted to create a course on improving performance in Spring Boot, but I couldn't find that I could attract an audience necessarily, or exactly how to relate to that audience, to that group of people, or even if that group of people really exists and they're willing to look really clamoring for this solution. So I'm going to step back a little bit. I think I'm going to have to broaden my audience a little bit to choose a very specific way of learning Java or learning to code with Java. And I think despite my topic today on choosing the right tool, Java is a great tool that's very flexible. Obviously, it's not perfect in everything, but the great thing about it is if you have legacy code written in Java and you're stuck with Java, you can make it do a lot of things that most languages can't do, or most languages can't do. Obviously not the biggest ones, because Java has this flexibility because they have such a broad community that have built things off of it, or built things for it. But that's what I'm going to focus on is writing Java, but with a different take on it of writing it in ways that are more sustainable, without tech debt, without having to refactor. But this will be more of a choose the right tool for the job, choose the right way to write Java for the job, those kind of things. So, like I said, choose the right tool, but if you're stuck with the tool, make it do the thing you want to do. On to a little bit about my blog. I didn't quite get the post I wanted to out because mostly time constraints. We had a holiday weekend this last weekend, so it was difficult to commit enough time with a lot of other things going on. Plus, I had some great progress on working on things outside. It was one of the last summer weekends, so it was great to do that. I did make good progress around the very specific kind of solve a problem blog post. So that's what I wanted to focus on. Just wanted to get my kind of blood flowing through with a lot of these ideas that have been around in my head. So I wanted to get those down first, but now I want to focus on more of the problem solution type of content and tie that back with creating Java or learning to write Java with a lot of different frames of mind, different goals. So that's where I'm at with jeffreyfate.com. Now, after last week's kind of ups and downs of podcasting, I think I'm starting to feel the groove. You just gotta follow you just got to follow the kind of 80-20 rule, the Pareto principle of just do the 20% that gets you 80% of the way there, which a lot of times is only prepping for, 5 minutes. Just spewing it out there, going with it, and most importantly, keep it tight and just do it, which are, oddly enough, 2 phrases that came from my last job. But it's really important to not think too much about it. Kind of like a lot of things. Just get it done. Don't think too much about it. Perfect is the enemy of good. All those kind of mantras. I mean, we've evolved to be overthinkers, and we've evolved to be so comfortable that we can overanalyze everything, but we just need to go for it. Kits. This week I am going to update, before this comes out, I'm going to update both of my kits, and I think add another one, because somebody got me thinking. Actually, it was Wes Boss. I was listening to Syntax, and he was talking about a third of his, I think he was talking about his Instagram feed. Yeah, it was Instagram feed. So a third of it is coding content, a third of it is cooking content, and a third of it is kids content. So I'm going to add a kids kit. Not that there's a lot there, really, because I get so many hand-me-downs, but every little thing that I do really like or buy, I'm going to put on there. And so you'll have that at kit.com/JeffreyFate. Lastly, the show notes, as always, discode.dev/the episode number.md. So discode.dev/003.md for this one. And this, I think, has been a little bit of a tighter episode, which is what I'm trying to do. And I just want you to be reminded of these topics and get thinking. And I think next time we'll get into some more concrete details about things, and look out for that in a week. Subscribe, and I will talk to y'all in a week.